All right, we're going to go ahead and get started. I want to first just thank everyone for joining us for today's webinar focused on the growing national movement around college promise programs and our joint efforts to ensure these powerful initiatives are focused not only on throwing open the doors of higher education to many more students, but also doing our part to ensure our students have the greatest chance at success and ultimately earning a credential. Before we get started, just a few items for housekeeping. First of all, today's webinar is being recorded and will be shared on Complete College America's website, our social media, and other channels so that it can be accessed later and shared with your colleagues or other folks who might be interested. Second, you can ask questions at any time during today's event using the QA option that should be located there on your screen. We will address all questions at the conclusion of the webinar. So first of all, my name is Blake Johnson. I serve as Vice President of Strategy at Complete College America. And I'm thrilled to be joined today by Martha Kanter, who serves as Executive Director of the College Promise Campaign, and Julia Lawton, who's the Associate Director of Integrated Student Support Strategies at Achieving the Dream. Today, Martha, Julia, and I will be providing information on current efforts in the College Promise movement. We'll share information on our joint initiative to integrate proven strategies into the design of College Promise programs, and we'll look to some promising efforts currently underway. With that, I want to go ahead and turn it over to the indubitable Martha Kanter, who will share some insights from the College Promise campaign.
Thanks so much, Blake. I think all of you on the phone can see and know how important it is that we go beyond promise to achieve the purposes for why the communities are coming together to do this work. And I think who knows better than community colleges. We're starting our fourth year at the College Promise campaign here in Washington, D.C. And we really see the promise with a purpose as a way to really guide and help colleges really push more students through to completion with the kind of quality academic programs, the tutoring, the mentoring, and the support. So we came together, the three of us, Achieving the Dream, Complete College America, and the College Promise campaign, to really tackle together some of the biggest challenges facing our nation's future. If you could just push the next slide. For some reason, you haven't, yes, here we are. So we have a national nonpartisan initiative in Washington, as I said. The campaign has been devoted to making at least the first 1 or 2 years of college at a minimum freely available for all students, and then to support the development and expansion of quality promise programs. So we've got ROI slides, we've got policy and research that's identifying the best practices with CCA and ATD, and we've seen tremendous growth in the last 3 years. If you want to go to the next slide, I'm sorry, this isn't working. Okay, so the nation's challenges, why are we doing this? Got too many jobs, students aren't filling. We've got a growing amount of student debt, though more than 90% of students are paying their loans, but the loans are just too big and they can't afford a house or a car or the things that many people with degrees were able to get 10, 20, 30, 40 years ago. We've caught up to 10th in the world for the number of college graduates. We were 16th when I started in the government in 2009, but we were number 1 a generation ago. And then all of us in community colleges have really been paying a lot of attention to what are the external realities of our students. How many are homeless? How many are hungry? You've seen a lot of research on that. How many need the mentoring and support that I think our colleges are so ready to offer. If you want to go to the next. 100 years ago, high school was a given for everyone in the country. Alaska was the last state to adopt free high school for all. And so what we're talking about is ramping this up for the 21st century. If you want to go to the next slide, Blake, thanks. And so this slide is kind of wonderful because college was free until the 1960s and 70s. And then starting in the 80s, the cost just started soaring. But even a private university, which is now Rice University in Texas, CUNY and SUNY in New York, the California community colleges, the state universities, and the flagship University of California, all were free for almost, well, more than 100 years. And, you know, the country came together after World War II and made college even more accessible and free for veterans, people that had served. And so when I think about College Promise today, and go on to the next slide, this is not a new idea, but we have to really bring this forward as something that communities and states can do. The key components for us is it can take place in a community college, a city, a region, a university, a state. The financial aid and student support should go beyond the norm. So we have first dollar programs that fill in the gap. We have last dollar programs. First dollar goes beyond the last dollar. The last dollar is the lowest cost. The first dollar is the highest cost. We have a variety of communities and states looking at how to do this. And it really comes down to how much can we sustain the financing in these times. You know, right now, when I look ahead, the US will have the highest transfer of wealth that our nation has ever seen in the next decade. How can we do this? But more important, or most important, it's really important to do this based on evidence. All the evidence that we're gathering from all the think tanks in the country, whether it's MDRC, whether it's West Ed, whether it's University of Pennsylvania AHEAD, Temple University, all of Dr. Gilbert-Robb's research, any number of professors in Texas, really looking at what is the evidence. Doug Harris is going to talk about performance-based funding results. These people have been studying evidence and performance-based funding now for more than a decade, sometimes even 20 years. And so what we're looking at is, how do we increase completion? How do we get the results so students are prepared for the workforce and for the rest of their lives? I want to just go ahead to the next one. Next one is just a summary of the kinds of features of Promise. And so let me talk a little bit, and then I'll turn this over to Blake, about Promise with a Purpose. These 4 blocks, the promise can take place locally or statewide. It can be a blended bunch of money, so public and private. We have a paper on that called Financial Sustainability. It should close the financial gaps that students pay and families, but it's never going to be enough, because when you look at housing, when you look at homeless, when you look at the need for shelter and food and other costs of college, textbooks, transportation, these gaps are huge, and we ought to do everything we can to give students the resources that they need. A lot of Promise programs are starting at younger ages. They're being called early college promises to really create that college-going culture throughout the community, starting even at birth in the Oakland Promise, or in kindergarten in the San Francisco Promise. And I just can't say enough about student support. It's the wraparound, it's the mentoring, it's tutoring, it's academic advising, and there's a lot of solutions in CAN, College Possible, what the colleges are doing in terms of really rethinking, advising, and counseling to give every student that support that's needed. And there's a cost to that, obviously. So if we go to the next slide, I've said this before, Promise has to have a purpose, and the desired outcome is to have a college-going culture throughout the community, but also change what we call college. College should include a 1-year certificate. It should include post-secondary education and training beyond high school. That should be the definition for the 21st century. And we want students to go as far as they can. Even a 2-year associate's degree or a baccalaureate is not going to be enough to continuing for success in the 21st century. Students will need to continue their learning. The next slide really talks about quality. And it talks about how fast the Promise has grown from 53 when I started looking at this in 2013-14, and now it's quadrupled to more than 200, and different states have put youth or adult promises in place. Some are in pilots, some are fully funded like Tennessee. But this should all be about quality. And how do we translate quality into the outcomes that we want for our students? So you can see the different states. The next slide just is a snapshot of the kinds of Promise programs you might not hear about. If you can go to the next one. You might not hear about Shasta College in Northern California or Van Guarantee's Promise in North Carolina. You hear a lot about Kalamazoo. There are very small cities, there are large cities, and it's happening everywhere. In fact, more than 45 states now have some kind of promise or multiple promises like California. And what's exciting is it's going to be all about the outcomes. So I'm going to tell you about that in my last part of this presentation. The next slide really says it doesn't happen alone. And this is a point of emphasis for all of you on the phone. You are building the kinds of partnerships we need. And at the national level, we're building those partnerships to reinforce what it is you're doing on the ground. So the bottom of the slide really lays out different partners that make a difference. In Milwaukee, the county executive, you might call it the county supervisor in California, has put a stake in the ground for promise. The mayor of Dallas, they have transportation for all of the students. The United Way, critical. Our partner K-12s, universities, Phi Theta Kappa. And that's why all of us have really joined together with Complete College America and Achieving the Dream, because we think together we can do a whole lot more than we can individually. So the next two slides are really show you some of the local and state outcomes. Here is just a snapshot of a few outcomes, but again, it's all in the tracking. So if you have a promise or you're thinking about it, make sure you've got a research component when you start, because this is about promise with a purpose. And the purpose is, what are the results? And when I look back and I think about this, for us, it's about persistence, it's about progression through, it's from all the transitions from elementary to middle to high school, through college, into the workforce for continuous learning. So it's about that progression, and you can't really understand what's happening to students and who's falling off the line if we don't study that through institutional research or partner universities or think tanks, or any number of people are doing this work. So we're tracking this, and we've got a research network that we're bringing together lots of different scholars to make a difference. On a statewide basis, which is the next slide, you can see some of the outcomes, like for example, in Tennessee, they're seeing less student debt. That's a huge outcome for us. In Oregon, you know, and we're seeing this all over the country, increases in enrollment. But it's the persistence, it's the promise of all of this that's going to make a difference. So when I look across this, you know, I'm looking at every year, every single year, this is all early stage development. And I think the promise is all in the design. You know, is it designed to achieve the outcomes that we would like to see as a nation? So I urge you to take a look at the Tennessee Promise outcomes, the outcomes of local programs like Buffalo or Syracuse, or even Long Beach in California, or others that have had a promise for more than 10 years. The outcomes are quite remarkable. So my last two slides just talk about where we're headed. And, you know, when I look ahead, I think we can actually double the number of promise programs in the country, but it's much harder. Can we double the number of promise programs that have the outcomes that we'd like to see, that are graduating students at higher rate, that are closing equity gaps? We have too much of an equity gap between students of color, different populations. We have equity gaps where we don't have, you know, half of veterans aren't using their GI Bill. We've got all kinds of equity gaps, and we've got to close that. And the good news in the paper that we wrote, Promises with a Purpose, we've got institutions profiled that are closing equity gaps. And certainly, you know, the Education Trust and other partners of ours are going to be monitoring those equity gaps. And I have the Institute for Higher Ed Policy and showing where we're making progress and where we're not. So I think the equity lens is really critical for Promise with a Purpose, because we need to have those outcomes to really drive the movement forward. So quality is our agenda. The last slide really says, what are we going to do next? We've got 3 buckets of work. We're going to leverage our policy and research to give you the best practices. Achieving the Dream is doing a remarkable job there to really show how community colleges are making a difference. And we've got Georgia State and other universities in the country doing the same. There's a consortium of colleges really identifying the best practices for completion. We need to change the conversation in the country. We need to build a much deeper understanding about why education beyond high school is so important. And I've got a list of our return on investment outcomes that I can share with anyone that's interested. But, using less subsidized services, being happier, living longer, being healthier, all of these things, in addition to the economic outcomes that we want to see for students and families. So we have to make the value proposition case for the local and state promise programs. And as I said, the last part of our work over the next few years is going to be about quality, about really showcasing where the promise with the purpose is happening around the country, why it's happening, who the leadership is, how the funding streams are being knitted together, and what those very important outcomes are for success in the workforce, in communities, and in the rest of students' lives. So let me turn this back over to Blake for the next part. He's going to do a deeper dive into the report that we did. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you so much, Martha. So I'm going to do just a quick little bit here. For those of you who aren't familiar with Complete College America, we're an organization that's focused squarely on closing achievement gaps and boosting college completion rates. And before I jump into the document, just a very quick overview of kind of how we do our work. We work through an alliance. We have 45 alliance members. That includes states, regions, institutional consortia. The alliance also includes a fellowship program, which we pull together some of the best and brightest in higher education to talk about big challenges for the field and how we can solve them. We have institutional implementation leaders that are involved in the alliance, and also really just anyone who believes like we do that we need to do a better job of serving students. Also, another part of our work is through implementation. So we focus on a series of strategies and go into those alliance member areas and through all these different things that are listed on the screen there, try to help push the agenda and ensure more students are graduating, that we're closing those gaps. And then we have an advocacy and communications arm, which pushes things like higher credit accumulation. We issued reports early on around the failures of traditional remediation. And then you've got Tristan Denley there from originally from Tennessee, now Georgia, being interviewed and some of the work that he's been doing. So we try to tell the story of great leaders who are doing big things in the field. At the heart of Complete College America's interest in promise work is the idea that these extraordinary efforts to boost a college-going culture throughout the country demand that we do everything in our power to ensure we keep the promise that we're making. And Martha articulated that beautifully. This is about making sure that at the end of that promise is a degree, because otherwise we're falling well short of what we've aspired to with these initiatives. So we partnered with the College Promise Campaign in Achieving the Dream to provide a framework that integrates college completion strategies into these initiatives. And while I won't go through the entire document, I want to spotlight just a few key components that I think kind of show what we're getting at here to try to ensure that quality that Martha talked about throughout her presentation. We viewed this framework as sort of a mutual responsibility agreement between students, institutions, and the entities that are stepping up to make the investment of promised dollars. For students, we looked at best practices all over the country, things that we're seeing at ATD institutions, that we're seeing throughout our alliance, and the indicators of ultimate student success. And there's some things we know for sure. We know that if a student completes 30 credits per year, 15 credits per semester, they are more likely to graduate. If they meet periodically with an assigned counselor or an advisor, coach, mentor, whatever the terminology you use, they're more likely to graduate. If they visit personally with each of their instructors and take advantage of the faculty office hours, they are more likely to succeed as well. So at one part, we know that students have a responsibility in the front end, right? To try to take the credits necessary to graduate on time and to meet with the folks who are there to provide them support. And institutions, creating the dynamics that allow for those support systems to be in place. We also recognize that it doesn't fall just to the student to do what's necessary to ensure they succeed. That we recognize institutions have to deliver education in a way that better serves those students and empowers their success. So institutions make graduation more likely for promised students if they do the following. And I know that Julia from ATD will touch on a couple of these things as well. First, CCA has been big on this notion of co-requisite remediation. So having students get the support they need alongside the college level courses. That has tripled and quadrupled success rates of gateway course completion. We know that it's a really, really big deal when it comes to ensuring ultimate success. As I mentioned with the student portion of this, we recognize that a consistent counselor, a mentor, folks from both the academic and career counseling side who are constantly engaging with the student, developing those meaningful relationships, that can make an enormous difference. We know that providing students with term-by-term degree and or certificate maps make a big difference in students completing. Those degree maps should be designed in a way that drives student momentum. That includes the 30 credits per year. And we recognize, first of all, that not every student's going to be able to take 15 credits a semester. Our push here is really that students take as many credits as possible to keep them on track for on-time completion. We've got 20 to 24 credits per calendar year for students who have to attend part-time. Again, Evelyn Wawaioli at SESI has her report out about even just taking one more class can make a difference. We believe that required completion of the program-aligned Gateway Math and English courses in the first year for both full-time and part-time students is a game changer. This has been proven time and time again that Gateway course completion is a major indicator of whether or not a student will ultimately succeed. And inclusion of at least 9 credits in the student's selected content area. You can think about this a number of different ways. A lot of this comes out of work that happened in Tennessee and from Tristan Denley around the idea of a momentum year and the power of that first year. If we can get a student into a program of study, we know it makes a big difference. This also comes in the form of the student having labor market data or other supports to help them make that big choice of a major on the front end. A couple other points here: ensuring that students register for all classes based on their degree or certificate maps, providing students with financial affordability supports, and offering high quality programs and courses with clearly defined learning outcomes, and regularly assessing and demonstrating what students have achieved as they persist to graduation. The list is long but not comprehensive. But we do recognize, and the point being really that institutions have a role to play, that it's not good enough just to invest money for students to attend. We've got to make sure that the systems and structures they run into when they get to the school are also committed to their success as well. And finally, the state and local leaders that can support these efforts, we've got a kind of list of what we think they should be doing as well. One is collecting and reporting on-time graduation rates and disaggregating them by race, age, income at the participating institutions. As Martha mentioned, other metrics for success are important, and finding out the best way to ensure that we're advancing the ball, I think, is key as these state or local leaders are kind of evaluating their investments. Monitoring the percentage of students meeting credit completion benchmarks at each institution and addressing the deficiencies if they exist. Supporting institutions however we can to implement high quality completion-focused courses and interventions that incorporate pathways, co-requisite remediation, other high impact practices. We recognize, because some students will hit hard times, that there needs to be an adequate appeals process for students who don't complete required credits or other mechanisms that we have in place to ensure progress, that they can, in the event of illness or other hardship, have a process to stay on track and maintain that promise for them. And then ultimately keeping the promise, as we've said a couple times throughout this presentation, including implementing long-term financial sustainability plans to ensure that we fund this promise after we've made it. In the event of unintended shortfalls, ensuring that currently enrolled students are also not affected, they get to continue on to graduation. So the full document actually includes a large number of institutional examples and evidence as well. So when you log on and get the full document, you can see a lot of the places that are making things happen here. And with that, I think, so I've got one more thing here. This is just the website, completecollege.org/promise, where you can download the document that we worked on together. And see some of that evidence that I mentioned before. And with that, I think I'm going to turn it over here now to Julia Lawton from ATD. So I'm going to give her control here so that she can move through her slides. Julia, take it away.
Oh, how do I go back? There we go. So, hi, it's great to be with you today. I'm really pleased to join CCA, Blake from CCA, and Martha to talk to you today about this really important work. So achieving the dream, just quickly, I'll do a very brief overview of what we do. We lead a growing network of community colleges across the United States, committed to helping their students, particularly low-income students, students of color, and other historically underrepresented and underserved students, to achieve their goals for academic success, personal growth, and economic opportunity. We have a proven model that helps colleges identify emerging needs and ways to improve practices across a full spectrum of different capacities that are required to do kind of whole college reforms, such as guided pathways and advising redesign and those kind of things. So our approach is to engage our network in implementing these whole college transformations using a coaching process that is constantly informed and improved by our partnerships and practice in the field. So we have partnerships with a lot of national partners, with state student success centers and beyond, to try and make sure that what we're delivering, the supports we're delivering, are the most up-to-date, the most data-informed and practitioner-informed supports we can offer. So achieving the dream is part of this work. Let's see if I can go across. There you go. Next slide. So achieving the dream's work very closely aligns with the work of in the Promise with a Purpose publication. As I mentioned, we're committed to helping colleges with helping their students, particularly low-income students and students of color, to achieve their goals. And so we're very much focused on progression and completion towards those goals and completion of academic programs of study. And so we know that higher education is complex, though, and that a Promise program that is actually built for completion kind of demands an intentional and comprehensive approach to student success that focuses on this student progression very intensely and in a personalized way. And this is kind of the hallmark of the work that Achieving the Dream has been doing for the last 15 years. And together with our network of over 220 colleges, we have a wealth of experience, which is why we're so pleased to be part of putting this publication together, this toolbox together with CCA and the College Promise program. So since Promise programs actually exist in 44 states, and we at ATD are a national organization operating in 41 states, as well as the District of Columbia, there's a lot of overlap in the work that we do to support our colleges, and including those colleges that actually operate in states with Promise programs or operate Promise programs themselves. See if I can go to the next slide. There we go. So we also partnered in this work because it requires a bold whole college change to achieve these results. And this is something Achieving the Dream has been working on, as I said, for 15 years. And we know that institutions can't make this kind of transformative change without leveraging existing capacity and building new capacities in different areas. And so we've identified over our 15 years of experience, 7 key capacity areas that you'll see on the slide here in this wheel, that we know colleges need to build capacity in order to be able to provide students with the best chance of being able to succeed in achieving their goals on a sustainable and scaled level, so that it's not just something reserved for certain students. So bringing in that equity lens as part of how we work. So for example, we know that to transform the student experience, which is what we are required to do at this point, we must transform the status quo, which means engaging in a kind of very heavy people process design, a redesign effort. And change at this scale that is very heavily focused on the people process can be kind of scary to approach. And the colleges that we've worked with have found, for example, that strong leadership and vision is essential so that people understand how the work aligns to the mission and goals of the institution, and also have a clear sense of the vision for the future state. And so this is really important as well for College Promise programs, to make sure that it's not just talking about, oh, we want college to be free, but why? Why is it important? Why are we working towards this, and why are we prioritizing it? It also helps to then talk that through to, okay, what does this mean for our institution? So having that vision of, we want to help students to access and complete their higher education goals. And this is what that means for what our institution needs to do next to make sure that happens for every student we serve. Another example, the capacity to communicate effectively with different stakeholders and to engage them in the redesign effort is critical to actually make sure that big changes like promise programs and big changes that they require to the institution actually work, actually take effect. And there's a huge support for it across the college community. It also obviously helps with communication capacity in communicating with the broader community about why you're moving towards a college promise program, what it means for students, and then helping communicate with students to get them involved and make sure they're benefiting from it in the way they need to. And then finally, we know that strategy and planning is necessary in this work because the changes that institutions need to make often go to the core of the mission and the design of the college, such as how funding is allocated or the organization's actual hierarchy and who reports to who. So can I go to the next slide? So what we talk about is moving towards a holistic approach to student success. So with this, this kind of base capacity in place in those 7 key areas, institutions can focus more on making sure that the student experience, that is the experience of their classes, the experience of their whole program, but also and essentially the experience of their supports, the whole how the whole process and the whole experience is knitted together has to be holistic. And so institutions can focus on that to make sure that the student experience begins with helping students identify their goals or purpose, because knowing where you're heading and why you're heading that way is an incredibly strong motivator, and it helps to reduce the waste of students' time and resources. It's also important because it can help students co-develop a clear plan for completion at the start of the student's journey, so they know what they need to do and when they'll complete. This is, again, another really important piece. If you start out on a journey but you can't see the next steps, it can be really demoralizing and demotivating. And so having a clear plan in place, but still knowing that that plan is flexible if you need it to be, can be really helpful in helping students get through. And then finally, providing meaningful ongoing support and guidance through proactive advising. This is something that I've been working on for the last 3.5 years with multiple institutions, 2 and 4 years. And the impact of proactive advising and deep and meaningful relationships with advisors on the student experience and their ability to persist, it has a lot of potential, and I think that potential is being recognized across the country more and more, particularly as the guided pathways movement takes hold. And so ultimately, promise programs are most successful when institutions focus on transforming the student experience into this intentional, comprehensive approach that focuses on the student progress towards their own specific goals. Many of these are aspects of the guided pathways reforms that are being implemented across the country, and so we know that colleges are already working towards this type of support. And yet there are still challenges. So ATD has been working with many institutions seeking this type to move towards a more holistic approach to student success for the last 15 years, as I said. And there are 3 major categories of challenges we see the colleges run into, and so I'm going to talk a little bit about these. The first is the scale and scope of this work. So we talk about this work as transformative approach to change, which means it comprises structural, process, and attitudinal change in different combinations at different colleges. And so structural change occurs when policies, structures, and procedures create a framework for new behaviors that improve the student experience throughout the institution. The process changes alter how people do their jobs on a daily basis and is transformative when enough individuals change their practices to ensure that large number of students encounter these new support interactions. And then attitudinal change, often the hardest for colleges, as it's kind of culture change at the macro and micro level. This occurs when individuals understand their work in new ways and view work processes in new ways. They start to really understand the why behind the work and to believe in it. And so this kind of transformative change often isn't obvious to institutions. We have institutions that expect the work to take a couple of years to plan, implement, and scale, and often find that when it doesn't happen that quickly, or the outcomes don't come instantaneously or in the next semester, that they lose momentum and the support of stakeholders who feel that they were told they were going to have these great outcomes in a year and it's not happened. So this work isn't making a difference. And so it's really important to know that and to understand that the scope and the scale of this kind of work takes years to really make plan, implement, and scale effectively. We've also found that colleges often create deep services to support specific student populations, and these are often effective, but sometimes difficult to scale, particularly those that are more resource intensive. So only the lucky few students end up benefiting. And so we know that if we're going to make the kind of difference that we need, that Martha was referring to at the beginning, and fill those jobs and really fulfill the purpose of education for students, we know that we have to scale this to all students to have this kind of impact that we intend. And so we have to be very strategic and create efficiencies with the limited resources we have, while also making sure that each student is treated as a human being and the support they receive is specific to what they need. And it's a tricky balancing act. And so the next challenge is energy and sustained momentum. I've mentioned this a bit in the last one. Given that this is a long kind of change, it's not something that happens overnight. Institutions can often struggle to sustain this momentum by engaging stakeholders to keep the energy and commitment levels. First, there's a couple of reasons for this. One is the most common, initiative fatigue. We hear this a lot. Sometimes this can be because communications or the implementation structures aren't reinforcing the connections between initiatives. Other times it can be because the same few people are called on to lead or contribute to all of the initiatives, and so they're doing they're kind of the ones doing the heavy lift on each of the initiatives. And then other times it can be linked to initiatives that have failed in the past and a collective feeling of, well, we've tried this before and it didn't work, so what's going to be different this time? And so combating that is particularly important to sustain momentum, as well as managing competing priorities and external pressures. And so competing priorities aren't just about the initiatives, they're about the day-to-day emergencies, the day-to-day processes we have to follow, as well as the different priorities from different funders or different accreditation agencies, different national organizations you're part of. So really making sure that these competing priorities don't impact the critical work that's being done to redesign the institution. It's very difficult, particularly with external pressures like enrollment declines or stagnant enrollment and declining state support. And then attention to the student voice and their needs. And so this one is particularly interesting because we often find that colleges do a lot of this. They collect survey data from their students. They have mini surveys after students use certain services, or they do focus groups every now and then. And so when we talk about paying attention to the student voice and the student need, that is essential to being able to do that. Those surveys and focus groups, they're essential. But when we're talking about this, we also talk about going beyond that, because the typical college was not designed to serve the students that we serve today. Our students come with more and more responsibilities, life experience, diversity of backgrounds, goals and needs. Going back to one of Martha's slides with the statistic that 14% of students are homeless, those are new needs that we may not have been aware of, or the students may not have had before. And so the old ways of serving students are not working for the students that we have today. So our new students require us to reconsider how we design and deliver services and pedagogy, as well as what services are needed. For example, as more first-generation students enter our institutions, we need to work to simplify processes and make sure we're not using jargon, particularly for entering college at this critical stage. If we put up those barriers, that jargon, it's really going to put people off, and they're going to find it a lot more difficult to navigate college and to persist in that first semester or two. And so to know how to design services, as I said, we go beyond just the annual survey or a few one-off focus groups. And we go to try and really embed it into the analysis of current policies and processes to discern their differential impact on different groups of students, different student needs, and then use that information to redesign the services to serve all students with the varying needs that they bring to us. And so this requires both the quantitative and the qualitative data, as well as the ability to resist the temptation to rely on anecdotal information, which has value in some contexts, but only when it supports the quantitative and qualitative data, so as something that can really bring that to life. So moving on to the key components of success that we see at colleges across our network and across the country. We've learned a lot in these 15 years on whole college redesign and what that looks like in the good and the bad, the ugly, the challenging. And so institutions that make completion more likely for promised students will be able to achieve that if they focus on co-requisite instruction that is carefully designed in structure and content, and delivered by faculty who have training in the pedagogy required, not just the subject-specific content. Also, to be able to build meaningful relationships between students and their faculty members, but also key staff, particularly, for example, your advisor, your counselor, whatever phrasing you use, to make sure that those relationships are deep, and so that student feels like the support and the advice they're getting is actually addressed to them and their goals, and is not only on the academic side, but also connected to their typically understood as non-academic needs, because we know that those non-academic needs actually have a significant impact on their academics. They also can help improve success for promised students if they provide clear program pathways, as we said, with the key momentum points mapped out and requirements clear to help guide the student along the path, while still building in that flexibility for the student to tailor their path. And then finally, to integrate academic and non-academic student supports into the college experience so that students receive support proactively to minimize the need for emergency supports, and in a personalized way so that students actually receive what they need to be successful in achieving their own goals, which is, to us, the definition of equity, making sure that each student receives what they need. And so a couple of bright spots. There are many. These are just 3 of them, but we have a whole network of colleges working towards whole college redesign in many of the areas laid out in the publication. So I'm going to just go over a couple of examples, but know that there are many, many more examples both in the publication and in the ATD network that we are happy to share and to make connections to. So the first is degree maps and proactive advising, and this is at the Community College of Philadelphia in Pennsylvania. So they moved from a model of faculty advisors only to assigned full-time professional advisors who would be the students' single point of contact to help them create program plans, to share just-in-time progress alerts, and to provide referrals to additional services. The assignment of these advisors was critical in order to be able to help students create that, have that meaningful relationship with someone. These advisors also interacted closely with faculty on a regular basis to enable them to provide students with the most accurate, timely, consistent, and labour market relevant information, so that the advisor isn't expected to have all of the information, but works closely with the faculty to be able to provide it in a consistent way. And the work required structural, process, and attitudinal change. And we have a long case study that talks about how CCP did this through these 3 different lenses of change. So from making advisor meetings mandatory, for example, which is a structural change, it's a policy change, to redesigning first-year experience courses, to creating clearer program sequencing and maps. The college also, in addition to doing this advising redesign, was pursuing a pathways reform at the same time, which helped them to have those maps available and the sequence in place. And this kind of transformative change required strong multi-tiered leadership, ongoing communication to cultivate buy-in and understanding, and a commitment to a culture of care. And so they actually, to get to this strong, consistent leadership and the kind of collaboration, they actually merged their academic side of the house with their student support side of the house to make sure that they had the leadership that was integrated from the beginning. Another example is CCBC, the Community College of Baltimore County in Maryland's Accelerated Learning Program, which I'm sure many people have heard of, given that it started in 2007 and has spread to more than 300 colleges across the country. And the ALP program is for students who place into DevEd academic literacy, 1 level below the college level. Under the ALP model, students placed into upper level reading and writing are co-enrolled in English 101 classes and in a companion ALP course, which is smaller and is taught by the same instructor as that 101 class. And that class meets periodically, immediately following the English 101 class. The aim of this companion ALP course, which is, as I said, very small, has 8 to 10 students, is to help students maximize the likelihood of success in English 101 and to reduce the time to their degree. However, it's also had a positive effect in ameliorating the stigma and demoralization that can be associated with DevEd, and in forming strong relationships about the ALP students with their instructor. Additionally, the small class size allows the instruction to be focused and detailed, but also tailored to the needs of the small group of students that are in the class. And so there's plenty of data to support ALP's success at CCBC and beyond, but one particular data point is that 63% of students in ALP passed their college level English course in 2 years or less, compared to 27% who took a developmental ed English class. And so finally, financial supports. Montgomery County Community College is our example on this one, from Pennsylvania again. And we've been working with them very closely over the last 3 to 5 years on advising and student support redesign. And so their vision for what they wanted to achieve was that every student in Montgomery County will have a personalized, holistic experience that combines quality service, purposeful, proactive support, and student self-sufficiency, aimed at achieving student success and the economic vitality of our community. And the college redesigned the onboarding and advising process such that every student in the first semester creates not only an academic plan, but a career and a financial plan as well that is very much tied to that academic plan. And in doing this, the college had to expand their definition of planning. That wasn't what the typical stakeholder of the college understood as planning, particularly the college's role in helping students with their plan. And so it's not enough just to plan the courses to completion if they're not aligned with these education and career goals, and if they're not supported by a plan to make sure that finances are not the reason a student drops out. So in the fall of 2017, the second year of full implementation of the career planning aspect, 93% of new degree-seeking students completed their plan to explore their career interests and options and completed their plan. On the financial planning side, it's a little bit newer. So their new tool launched in fall 2017 as part of a financial aid and financial literacy strategy that aims to not only support students in emergencies, but also to plan years ahead to manage the funding of their studies. And in addition to using the plan with new students who are filing an appeal due to unsatisfactory progress, students who request emergency aid funds or book funds, these students all were the pilot group that completed the tool and met with a financial aid administrator to gain a deeper understanding of financial literacy. But in addition to that, the tool was made available to all students who didn't necessarily get the additional support, but were able to use the tool. And one of the insights gained is that the tool is much more effective when used as part of a financial aid meeting or a financial literacy presentation rather than something that is standalone. And so one challenge with this is scaling the delivery of the tool in an effective way that also includes this accompanying meeting or presentation. And that's something that the college is working on at this point. And so, as I said, these are just a couple of examples of how ATD colleges are moving towards a more holistic approach to student success, and how this learning from these colleges has informed the kind of best practices that we've pulled together for the Promise with a Purpose publication. And so I'm going to pass back to Blake now to talk through the next part of the presentation.
Thank you very much, Julia. We have just a few minutes left, so I want to touch on a couple quick things, and we'll see if we've got any questions, and then we'll wrap up here. You know, I wanted to share just kind of an emerging example that I'm very excited about. In addition to working at Complete College America, I also serve on the City Council here in Indianapolis, Indiana, and had the privilege of co-chairing a task force to develop a Promise program for the city of Indianapolis. We were doing this at the exact same time that ATD, the College Promise Campaign, and CCA were working together on our joint statements. So I just want to kind of highlight this resource, which is the report that came out of that work and some of the kind of practices that have been incorporated here. We've got a $2 million annual appropriation for last dollar Promise scholarships and completion grants. Support for school counselors, the use of behavioral nudges to keep kids on track as they prepare for their final year of high school moving into college. PR campaign here locally using the mayor's office and some of the other local folks to boost FAFSA completion and access to existing resources, including we have a 21st Century Scholars Fund and a few other award programs in the state and city that are useful. And then we integrated all of the success recommendations from the Promise with a Purpose document, both in terms of student eligibility as well as the way the institutional partnerships work and the implementation of proven practices that Julia went through and that I shared from the document, with a huge focus, obviously, on proactive advising and support. And then as the third component, an effort to ensure students are informed about the workforce here in Indianapolis and what they can be moving into. If you've got something you want to read in the evening after you've read Promise with a Purpose, I'd encourage you to download this report as well. Before I jump over to question and answer here, I just want to say that we will follow up with an email featuring the video from today. We'll also provide the PowerPoints that were used, and then we'll share the resources that were pointed to as well to make it easy for you. So if you logged on today, we'll make sure that we send that over to you. And ultimately, we want to help. Everyone on this call here is excited about the work we're doing together. We want to make sure that, as Martha said, the programs are high quality and that there are outcomes, not just a promise on the front end, but a promise kept on the back end. So with that, I'm going to just pop open here and see if we've got any questions. As of right now, we don't, so we'll just give it one moment here. It sounds like we did a very thorough job between Martha, Julia, and myself. So if you've got any questions, again, the way to do that is the QA box that's there on the screen through Zoom. And we'll give it just one more moment, see if anyone's got anything to type in there. I think we're good. So again, I want to thank Martha and Julia for participating with me today. I thank all of you for spending some time with us this afternoon. And like I said, if we can do anything to help start a promise program in your area, to refine a promise program in your area, or to just be a sounding board about the ways to make these promise programs really, really successful and focused on student success, we're happy to help. So thank you all so much for participating, and we'll see you soon.